standing in the road right there. Even if they don't use it much. Okay, so this building here is St. James's Palace, the second palace of today's tour. Now, Queen Victoria decided she would move from here over to Buckingham Palace, and I don't really blame her. I mean, if you thought the other one was average, you must be thinking, what the hell is it about this one? I mean, how is this a palace, to be perfectly honest? Well, this is where the royal family lived before they moved over to Buckingham Palace. It's also the official address of the Queen still for some reason, so if you do want to write her a postcard, do make sure you address it to this place here. And this is where they receive loads of ambassadors, things like that. And when Prince Harry's a bit drunk after a night out, he'll be coming through this gate, and there'll be loads of paparazzi doing all that sorts of things. But anyway, the palace itself was built in the Tudor style because it was built for one of our most famous ever kings, one of the Tudors, King Henry VIII. Now, Henry VIII is one of our most famous kings because of two main reasons. Firstly, he was a really, really brutal guy. He actually had people executed all the time just because he didn't really like them very much. So he accused them of treason, and you couldn't argue with the king, so they would have their heads cut off as a result of that. So he had a bit of a reputation for that. But also, he very famously, of course, had 6 wives. Now, the first of these wives was called Catherine of Aragon, a Spanish lady, and basically Henry VIII was desperate to have a male heir to the throne, to have a son to take over from him when he died. But Catherine of Aragon, she gave birth to 5 daughters, can you believe? And he really wasn't particularly happy with this, so he decided he needed to get a divorce from her. But this country at the time was strictly Catholic, so he couldn't just do that as easily as you might think. He had to send a messenger over to the Pope to ask the Pope himself if he could get a divorce. And the Pope said, no, actually, because that goes against everything I believe in. And there's plenty of people telling me that he's not a particularly nice guy anyway, so I'm not going to do him any favours. So Henry VIII doesn't take rejection too well, and in order to get a divorce from his first wife, he makes a decision that would affect the rest of this country's history, because he abolishes Catholicism in this entire country just so he can get a divorce from his first wife. Unbelievable stuff. And that began the swing of the pendulum from Catholicism to Protestantism in this country. But he replaced the Catholic Church with the Church of England, which is still the main religion in this country to this day. And still to this day, the only major difference at that time, the only major difference was simply that the Pope would not be in charge of the Church of England, but very conveniently, the monarch of the country would be in charge of the Church of England, so the King of England. So he asked himself, can I please have a divorce? And he said, well, yes, of course I can have a divorce. So he divorced his first wife, and very shortly afterwards married his second wife, Anne Boleyn, who he was really hoping would give him a son as well. Now, Anne Boleyn is famous because she gave birth to Elizabeth I, who would become a great queen a little bit later on. But she's also famous for being one of his 2 wives who ended up having their head cut off because of him. Pretty harsh stuff. And if you want to find out a bit more about why she had her head cut off, and in fact, you enjoy stories of execution, you want to find out about the grim side of London's history, then I thoroughly recommend you come on a tour we run here in London every day at 6 p.m. It is called the Grim Reapers Tour. And if you come on this tour, the first half of it is dedicated to things like executions, ghosts in the Tower of London. You'll go and see the docks where the first British convicts went to Australia from. And then the second half basically is dedicated almost entirely to following the trail of the notorious serial killer Jack the Ripper. So if that's the sort of thing that makes you, makes that you are interested in, I should say, then by all means go on this tour. Like I said, 6 o'clock every single day. The station is called Tower Hill in East London. It's right by the Tower of London. So go there, 6 o'clock every day, and that's where you'll find this tour. But coming back to today's tour, another person who got their head cut off in our history was one of our kings, a guy called Charles I, and he lived in this place right here. Now, he believed very much in what is called the divine right of the king, so he felt it was his God-given right to rule the country without any interference from anybody else. But the people in Parliament were thinking, hang on a minute, we should be running this country with some help from the king. And frictions really started to rise between the two of them, and the king started to pass some laws without even consulting the people in Parliament, and that decision actually led to a civil war in this country between the followers of the king and the followers of the government. Now, surprisingly, the government actually had a heck of a lot more followers, as it turned out, than the king. So the king lost this civil war, and for that reason he was tried and convicted of treason against his own country, which is pretty unheard of. In fact, he's the only one that's ever happened to in this country. And treason, of course, carries a death penalty, so he had his head cut off in Whitehall, which is just down in that direction. So, considering the circumstances surrounding his death, his son thinks, well, I better get the heck out of here, even though I'm supposed to be king. clearly things haven't been going too well for our family of late. So he goes over to France, where he spends 11 years in exile. And during these 11 years, we become a republic for the first time since the monarchy was created. So we have no king and no queen for 11 years. And during this time, we were ruled mostly by a guy called Oliver Cromwell. He wasn't really much fun, guys. He actually banned dancing in this country, can you believe? How ridiculous. Maybe it makes the film Footloose seem a bit less ridiculous. But anyway, he banned dancing here, and he also banned the celebration of Christmas. What sort of man stops you from celebrating Christmas? I mean, come on. So, by the end of his life, a lot of people, particularly the royalists, were very happy that he was gone. And they decided, let's bring back the monarchy. So they asked Charles II to come over from France and become the king once more. That's exactly what he does. Now, just to prove how hated Oliver Cromwell was by the royal family of that era, they decided they would dig up his body and retry him for all the crimes he committed whilst he was still alive. They then found him guilty and they hung his dead body and his head fell off. All pretty ridiculous, but shows you how hated he was amongst many people here. But anyway, Charles II, who came back from France, he's the guy I mentioned earlier. He had loads and loads of mistresses, a bit of a womanizer. And a lot of them lived in this very area here, because we are now on the outskirts of Mayfair, which is one of the most exclusive parts of this city. One of the rich and famous places in this area. Now, he had been in France, and at that time France was still Catholic, whereas we were very much Protestant. But he had picked up a real taste for French Catholic women, which did not go down particularly well here. But he did have a handful of mistresses who were from this country and were Protestants, and they were a little more popular amongst the British people. And one of them was a particularly popular lady who was quite an important lady as well. And it just so happens her house is a little further down Pall Mall, this road here. So that's going to be our next stop, guys. So if you follow me, I'll tell you more about her then.